So you're the type of person who's interested in aligning better with truth. But what exactly is truth? Why is it that people are so fascinated with truth? And how exactly can we apply truth in the context of our personal lives, in the context of our duty, in the context of morality, relationships, and our work? Well, welcome to the Vitality Principle. I am Christopher Nelson II, and you might not know much about me, but what you do need to know about me is that I, for fun, as a non-scholar, non-student, whoever else would do this, wrote a 32-page article in 6 days. Okay, now what type of person would do that? Clearly the type of person who has something to write about. And I certainly did have something to write about. Massive perspective change has happened in my life over the last several months since writing that article, and it completely revitalized my spirit, my conscience. And so that's why I've started this podcast. Welcome to this podcast. If you're new, by the way, on this podcast, we dive into the truth and application of the following principle, that the identity and purposes of the God of the universe are a sufficient compass for leading the ideal lifestyle and achieving a peaceful conscience. And so on today's episode, the center of the discussion will be truth fundamentally. It is super, super important that we tackle this issue in today's day and age. There are so many different perspectives swirling around our 21st century modern context. And a lot of people claim to be proponents of truth. A lot of people seem to think that truth is something that you can create up just out of your own imagination whenever you feel like it. A lot of people think that truth is just directly tied to hardcore, commonly observable realities. And so today we're really going to hammer out some of the distinctions here, because as we try to elevate our vitality together, our fundamental life force, what makes us fundamentally people, it is so, so important that we're aligning with an accurate, full picture of reality. If we're not doing that, and we're kind of just going rogue or just trusting what we think makes sense without testing it against other people's perspectives and without testing it against natural observation and divine revelation, that we're just going to find ourselves in a position of struggle as we try to fight our way through the various challenges we encounter out in life, as well as the challenges that we are dealing with within ourselves. So on today's episode, we're going to dive into truth. It is central, as I've already articulated. With that said, we have to start with Jesus Christ. If you're not aware, this is technically a Christian podcast, but it's a podcast that I hope anybody, regardless of your worldview or religious perspectives, would desire to listen to, because I really do believe that the concepts I talk about, that I wrote about in that 32-page article, are concepts that people can see, people can observe as a part of natural reality, and who can come to the conclusions that I've come to. I don't believe my conclusions are created by me. I believe my conclusions are not conclusions that I could create by myself. I think it required a certain level of seeing the end of my own knowledge and understanding to be able to align with these concepts. And so I want the same for you. But as we start with truth, we have to start with Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ actually had a very interesting interaction with Pontius Pilate on the day of his sentencing. You can find this account at the back end of John chapter 18. But pretty much Pontius Pilate and Jesus, while Jesus is in front of Pontius Pilate, obviously, are having a conversation about Jesus and his kingdom, and if he's a king, if he's the king of the Jews. And Jesus kind of gives him a vague answer about that, but he makes it pretty clear that his kingdom is not of this world. Otherwise, his followers would be fighting to prevent him from being executed for the crime that he was convicted of. But towards the back end of that conversation, Jesus makes it clear that those who are of the truth recognize God and are related to him. People who are of the truth are associated with Jesus. And Pilate asks one very simple question to Jesus after he says that: what is truth? Now, regardless of the intonation that you want to envision Pontius Pilate asking that question in, nonetheless, the question is legit. It's a question that gets right at the heart of human nature, because this is a question that every single person asks themselves at one point in time or another during the course of their lifetime. What is truth? And so Jesus actually had talked about this earlier on in his ministry, much earlier on, before he ended up in front of Pontius Pilate, awaiting his execution before his eventual resurrection. In fact, when he was interacting one day with a Samaritan woman in midday, heat of the day, that woman was out getting water. Jesus finds her, and they have an interesting conversation about a few different issues: her life, the differences in perspective religiously between the Jews and the Samaritans. But during the course of his conversation with her, he makes something pretty clear. He makes clear to her that God is spirit, and that those who worship God do so in spirit and truth. And in doing that, Jesus provides us a pretty clear understanding about what his perspective on this is. Since he's the God of the universe, that's a pretty good perspective for us to work off of. Working specifically, within this context, what we know about truth from Jesus' own mouth is that truth pertains to spirit, and spirit pertains to truth. Those are intertwined realities. And so if you wanted to think about what Jesus says in that verse in John chapter 4 in a more formulaic type of way, not that that's the way it works, but just for simplicity's sake, spirit plus truth equals worship. In other words, truth fundamentally is something that is associated with human beings giving worship to God, glorifying God for who he is. Every single person has a spirit, and that's something that God communicates in the Old Testament as well to the prophet Isaiah in particular. In Isaiah chapter 42, Isaiah is pretty clear. God is the one who gives spirit to all who walk on the earth and breath to all who live on the earth. And so every single person has a spirit. But despite that fact, not every single person worships God. And there are many people who think that they worship God who are actually just worshiping a paper tiger God, a God who looks very appealing, whose relationship you can comprehend. And in that circumstance, you can get what you think is a reasonable transaction. I give certain things to this God who I believe is legitimate, and this God gives me something in return for my benefit. That is not really how worship of God works. And Jesus kind of made that clear here. Getting something from God isn't the goal of obtaining truth. Getting something from God isn't the point of worshiping a God. Aligning with the heart of God and glorifying for who he is and what he's doing is the heart of truth. That is what truth fundamentally directs the human spirit, the human conscience, towards. But like I said, not everyone ends up worshiping God. Not everyone ends up worshiping the God of the Bible, in particularly, who is the one true God. And so the question really is, why is that the case? Everyone has a spirit, not everyone worships. So clearly the issue is with our understanding of truth. And to this point, I mean, there are just so many ways we could evaluate this, but I think it's kind of important, first and foremost, to tie together something that is very fundamentally important that not a lot of people in today's day and age seem to tie together. It's the reality that spirit and conscience are actually really the same thing. Conscience is what the secular world refers to as the same thing that the Bible refers to spirit as. And to this point, a few weeks ago, I was reading an article from a secular news outlet, Epoch Times. As far as I'm aware, they're a secular outlet. And it was a very interesting article about the conscience and near-death experiences. Now, there are people who don't think near-death experiences are legit. That's fine. If you're one of those people, you have some explaining to do, probably. But as far as near-death experiences are concerned, I think they're legit for sure. Now, whether people fully understood the out-of-body experience they had is another story. But as far as them actually having that experience, that is pretty darn legit. Okay, near-death experiences are not hallucinations. They're not dreams. They're circumstances where a person's brain is medically deemed to be shut down. But yet, this person claims to have had an out-of-body experience during the period of time where their brain was shut down. And then after coming back to their body, radical life change tends to happen. Okay, and this has been observed over thousands of different NDEs by several different accredited scientists who are certified in their fields, who've done the study, who've conducted interviews with these patients. And anyway, the center point of this Epoch Times article was that there are three common themes that the people who had these experiences and communicated these experiences to these scientists shared throughout their different, unique, subjective experiences. And number one was the reality that the conscience persists beyond the physical body. Okay, now that's something that scientists cannot reconcile. That's something that science cannot reconcile. Because as far as science is concerned, the conscious is something that is produced by the human brain. It's the result of neurons firing back and forth, etc. That's the oversimplified version. But the commonly held perspective is that conscience is produced by the brain. If that's the case, then it doesn't make sense that the conscience would persist beyond the physical body. The brain is a part of the physical body. But in these experiences, like I said just a little bit earlier, the observation was that medically, this person's brain was shut down. Their brain was off. It was not functioning. And despite that, they claimed that they were in that circumstance from a different vantage point outside of their physical body, and they were observing stuff in the circumstances, even like really miscellaneous stuff, like where stuff was in the operating room that they were in before their brain shut down and before they got a different vantage point of the situation. Then when they came back, they were able to articulate that, and that actually tested against the experiences had by the doctors in the room with that person. And so, at a minimum, the first theme that tied across near-death experiences was that consciousness persists beyond the body. There's an awareness that these people had outside of themselves. And that was very, very interesting, because that kind of flies in the face of what many conventional materialists and scientists would conclude about the ability of the conscience. So that was number one. Takeaway number two is that after coming back to their body, these people had a dramatic change in their disposition. They had a completely renewed sense of duty, of purpose, even to the extent that many of them actually took radical action that involved massive sacrifices on the professional and personal fronts. People were willing to sacrifice their careers for the sake of pursuing something different that they felt aligned with their purpose, that they were made for. That's very interesting. So not only does consciousness exist beyond the human body, but it's tied directly to duty, tied directly to purpose. The third theme that persisted across these NDE experiences is that people came back with a self-proclaimed sharper understanding of how to live a good life. Now, obviously, that has to be tested against the truth of Scripture, but just fundamentally, it's interesting that these people came back and claimed, okay, my experience out of body has brought me back to my body with this more thorough understanding of what morality actually is, of what a good life actually is, of how I should actually treat people. Very, very interesting stuff. And so ultimately, those were the three themes that persisted across hundreds of different NDE experiments in this particular article. But there have been thousands of different NDE experiences that scientists have worked on and legitimately studied. And these themes are definitely observed in those ones as well. And so all of that to say, as far as secular science has observed, the conscience is something that pertains to a transcendent aspect of humanity, something that's not tied to our material physical body. But it's also something that pertains to duty and to morality. And the funny thing about this is that this is exactly how Scripture describes what we call spirit. Obviously, John chapter 4 is an example of this. Spirit and truth, okay, equals worship of God. God is the one who has created everything for a purpose, and his standard of morality is the standard of morality that is placed on the hearts of every single person, that is suppressed at the same time by every single person in our natural state. But more clearly, we can go back to Genesis 2 in the circumstance immediately post-creation. So God creates the world in 6 days. He rests on the seventh day. And then we get a little bit clearer of a description of how exactly man came to be. In Genesis chapter 2, we see that God breathed into man, and man became a living spirit, a living being. But after that, we also see that God puts man immediately to work. God gives man a purpose, a sense of duty. He puts Adam in the garden to tend the garden. He gives Adam the responsibility of naming the creatures that he's created. At the same time, he gives Adam an instruction to not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He does not want Adam to have this knowledge of morality, but he gives him that instruction because Adam can understand a moral command. Do not do this. You can do this. Do not do this. And so it's so interesting that from even just those two sections of Scripture, John chapter 4 and Genesis chapter 2, we see that the spirit of a person pertains to the exact same things that secular science has concluded are related to the conscience. And so fundamentally, all of this pertains to truth, an understanding of accuracy. Why am I actually here? How should I actually conduct myself? And all of that is tied to an aspect of our being that transcends material reality. Obviously, there's debate about this issue. It's not like this is a commonly held perspective. If it were, the world would be a very different place. But it seems like that's an interesting conclusion to draw, for sure. The conscience is not something produced by something material. And that obviously ties directly to the biblical perspective, which is that the conscience, the spirit of a person, comes directly from God, and it's given to every single person, which is why every single person has a knowledge of morality, has a sense of purpose. That said, obviously, there are many different perspectives on what that truth is. And I talked about this a little bit on one of the last few episodes I did when I was reading through my 32-page article on the narrative of creation. But the unique thing about humanity is that not only do we have that spirit, that conscience, but we also have a material body. And biblically speaking, our material body is the hindrance to our spirit. It is something that restricts us from being able to fully apprehend God's truth. Spiritual creatures like demons do not have that issue, which is why God does not provide redemption opportunity for the angels that fell. They purely apprehended God's truth, and since they were creatures and unrighteousness was found within them, and they chose to rebel from God's role that he had placed them within, they were committed to the earth. They were cast down out of heaven with the promise of eternal bondage in hell. And so purely spiritual beings apprehend God's truth, but they, for one reason or another, particularly because they don't have a material hindrance, are confined to their initial moral decisions in that way. But humans, on the other hand, are not. There's a reason why God redeems human beings, and that is because of the material aspect of our being. God placed a spirit within a material structure. That is what a person is. A person has a spiritual and a material aspect of their being, obviously. And so that material aspect of our being has its own preferences aside from God's truth. It has its own feelings. It has its own pleasure mechanism. It has things that it enjoys doing and enjoys experiencing in its five senses that are different, oftentimes, fundamentally, from the pursuits and the emotions and the desires that we should actually be experiencing that align with God's truth. And so that really is the reason why there are so many different perspectives on truth. It's because every single person has a body, and within the body is sin. Within the body is this desire to do what we want, to do what makes us feel good, to do what makes us content. And at the end of the day, that wins out, because as people who are corrupted by the flesh, whose fundamental spirit is hindered from understanding and apprehending God's truth, that is just the reality that we find ourselves in. And so this leads people to have a tiny bit of the truth oftentimes. People know truth, right? Even if you look across different religions say different things that are genuinely true and test against an accurate understanding of reality, but they don't have the full picture. They don't see the entire puzzle, if you will. They only have a few pieces, and they don't realize that there are more pieces to be seen because that hindrance is so significant, since we are people. And obviously our physical body is how we move and operate within the material universe. But to that point, it's with that knowledge in mind, it's even more important that we make an effort to understand what God's truth truly is on the moral front, on the purpose front. Obviously, science can help us understand the truths of how our reality works. We can look around, we can make observations, we can use the scientific method, and we can draw conclusions that then lead to the ability to produce practically beneficial things for humanity. But on the morality front, conscience is not material. It's something that is beyond material. And so that clearly falls in the realm of spirit. God is spirit. And so when we're thinking about the deeper things of humanity, how we treat people, that is something that we have to go to God for fundamentally, and that's not something that we can create for ourselves. But again, back to the point, there are many different perspectives on this. And so it's really important that we are able to distinguish between what is actually true, what has elements of truth, and what looks true but is actually completely false. Those are the three general categories. And an example I like to use to describe this particular categorization is the example of fruit, right? Not necessarily in the Christianese sense, right? Where people who have a new heart, a new spirit will bear fruit, good trees produce good fruit. Not in that sense necessarily, right? That's a podcast for another time. But specifically as we're talking about truth and identifying different types of truth, different qualities of truthfulness, if you will, I like to think about the example of fruit, okay? Fresh fruit, for example, would be something that is totally true. It is placed fully within the entire context of whatever the relevant truth principle is. And if you eat it, it's good for you. It's nourishing for you. You need it to survive. It needs to be a part of your diet so that you can successfully do life, okay? Pure truth is like a fresh fruit. It's good for you. Plastic fruit, fake fruit, is not good for you at all, okay? Not only does it not taste good, but it's also a choking hazard. It can cause internal bleeding if you were to try and eat a plastic fake fruit. You do not want to do that, okay? Fake fruit is something that is completely false, although at initial glance, it might look in some ways like it might be true, but getting a little bit closer, getting a different vantage point of that self-proclaimed truth makes it pretty obvious that it's not true at all, and that if you consume it, if you direct your life in alignment with it, you're going to find yourself a lot more harmed than you really ought to be, okay? So we have fresh fruit, and then we have fake fruit, plastic fruit. But in between, we have fruit snacks, okay? Now, this is not to knock on fruit snacks. I actually personally like fruit snacks a lot, whether or not they're fully good for you. They're phenomenal, okay? If you don't like fruit snacks, then you're probably more disciplined with sugar than I am. But at a bare minimum, okay, people like fruit snacks, okay? Fruit snacks taste good. And if I'm not mistaken, there's actually even some fruit, actual fruit, in fruit snacks, okay? Legitimate snack, People eat it all the time. It tastes good. It feels good for a lot of people to consume. And it has elements of sufficient and sustainable something in your diet. It has fruit in it. Okay. It has legitimate stuff in it, although it's not actually fruit. And that's actually the whole point here. It looks like, it doesn't look like fruit, but it claims on the packaging to have fruit flavor. Okay. It tastes something like fruit. It feels good. It's pleasurable. But in reality, it's not fruit. It's not fresh fruit because there are elements of artificial content within the snack. Aside from the fact that it's just not fruit. It's not packaged the same way that natural fruit is. Okay. Natural fruit doesn't grow in nature with the plastic wrapping on it that says, okay, this flavored fruit. It just grows, right? That's fruit snack. And this is oftentimes where people find themselves in. People think that they're snacking on a fruit. In reality, they're snacking on fruit snacks. Something that tastes like fruit, something that even has some fruit in it, but at the end of the day is just packaged in an artificial way. It's not natural, and it's not good necessarily. It has elements of naturally occurring things in it, but it itself is not the natural fruit that you need in your diet. It's not fruit. So these are really the three categories of truth, honestly. This is the application to be made here when we're thinking about how to process truth and how to obtain truth. We're looking for fresh fruit. That's our pursuit. We're looking for something that might not taste as good as the fruit snacks all the time, but that is good for us. And if we add that to our palate, what we end up realizing is that it tastes better than we thought it did. And it is actually good for us. Our body starts to be nourished. We feel different. We live differently because we're consuming fresh fruit. That's what we need. That should be the goal of our pursuit of truth, to get fresh fruit, something that's naturally occurring, that is good for us, something we can observe in reality that is good for us. And when we consume it and align ourselves with it, it produces practical improvement in the quality of our life. We should obviously be looking to avoid plastic fruit at all costs, okay? And oftentimes this is easy for people to do. It's pretty easy for people to be skeptical, naturally, of concepts. If someone says something that sounds a little bit strange or that you haven't personally observed, you might initially respond by saying, I'm not sure about that. I don't believe that. My intuition says that doesn't make sense. Okay, so people typically know not to eat plastic fruit. And so obviously our goal, aside from obtaining real fruit, is to avoid plastic fruit at all costs. But as for fruit snacks, the issue here is that many people make fruit snacks out to be fresh fruit. And as a part of our pursuit of truth, we have to understand that while there are certain elements of truth that we can get from certain people's subjective perspectives on reality, those perspectives are not necessarily fresh fruit, even though they might include aspects of fresh fruit, aspects of truth. They're still artificially confined within the mind of a person who is hindered by their flesh, hindered by their material reality, which prevents them from fully understanding God's truth. This is true for every person, by the way, whether or not you're a Christian, whether or not you're an atheist, whether or not you adhere to any other perspective on reality that claims to be truth-oriented. Every single person has an issue fully apprehending God's truth in time, in our physical body. There's no one who can present you a fully complete understanding of reality or the fundamental principles that are at work in reality beyond the material ones we observe. Only God himself can present fully apprehensible truth, whether or not you and I can fully apprehend it, fully understand it. And so in our pursuit of truth, we want to get fresh fruit. We want to avoid plastic fruit, but we have to treat fruit snacks as what they are. things that have elements of truth that we can extract from them, but that we should not devote our full perspectives to. That should be our pursuit of truth. That said, how does this apply to our personality? Who we are as individuals, our identity is central to how we do life and the perspective that we have in many different circumstances that we're a part of. Whether we're doing something serious, whether we're doing something for fun, who we perceive ourselves to be is very important. And that is fundamentally truth-oriented. But as far as that's concerned, when we're thinking about our personality, we have to understand that we are not unchangeable. We are not immutable. And so while our natural self might want the fruit snacks because they taste good, because they have some fruit in them, and even though it's not a naturally occurring thing, it's not terrible for us. That is the type of perspective that can be changed. We do not, just because something is natural for us, because it makes us feel good, we do not have to orient our perspective and our thought about who we are in alignment with those naturally occurring things. The beauty about humanity is that we are not God. Only God is unchangeable. Only God is immutable. That's the fancy theological word for it. And impassible. God is unchanging and he is uninfluenced. Nothing changes God, but God changes creation. Specifically, God changes people. He gives people who have a corrupted spirit, a spirit corrupted by their own flesh, a new spirit, a new heart with new desires and new emotions that are not natural. And then he gives them the Holy Spirit to seal their spirit for the day of redemption, where at long last their physical body will die as it awaits a new body, a body that does not have natural proclivities and affinity for fruit snacks, but has a full desire for fresh fruit, the truth of God in relationship with him. And so that's the hope. The hope is that whoever you perceive yourself to be right now is changeable. And you and I both know that there are parts of our lives that we wish we could get a do-over on, that we wish we had a different perspective on. We have struggles that we wish we could overcome. This is the way we do that. We recognize, first and foremost, that we are not God. We are changeable. And that natural aspects of our being that might feel good to us, that might feel like they give us a sense of identity and a sense of true nourishment, actually don't. But that is not a hindrance to the God of the universe who changes hearts and who changes souls and who renews minds. So as far as our personality is concerned, when we're understanding who we are not immutable and we can be changed. That is the very most important aspect of our identity when we're thinking about truth, who we are and how we go and get truth. We can change and our perspective can change for the better. As far as duty and our sense of purpose, we should make it our goal to obtain and investigate reality. The beauty of God creating everything is that there's not a single thing that exists independent of God. Okay? There's different type of energy at work in our reality. There's obviously the kinetic energy that we see and experience every day, heat, electricity, light. There's conscious energy. Okay, right? That is our conscience. It's something that exists, that produces moral, purposeful work. And that's all energy is. Energy doesn't have to be this ethereal thing that many spiritual people claim that energy is. Oh, the energies in this circumstance. Oh, the vibes that I got. It doesn't have to be ethereal. The definition of energy is something that has the capacity to produce work. Okay? You have the capacity to produce work, not only physically, but spiritually. You can produce morally good action. Okay? Same thing with God. God is conscious. He is a person. He's a spiritual being who can produce work, who does produce work, who not only created everything, but is actively upholding everything and is working in everything that he created to this day. Okay, so energy is not something that is ethereal. Everything is energy, fundamentally, in some way or another. And so when we are understanding our sense of purpose, why we were created, what work we were created to produce on the spiritual front, on the physical front, we should obtain an accurate understanding of reality first and foremost. What do we exist within? Who is God? What is the universe? How does the universe generally work? Who am I? What are my unique material and spiritual gifts, right? These should be things that we pursue an understanding of and obtain an understanding of and investigate even after getting an understanding of it. You never stop growing. There's never a point in your life where you stop needing to obtain an understanding of your purpose, of why things happen. That's never something that goes away. Always be asking why, not to a dead end. Okay, there are things that you cannot fully understand, right? And that's okay. But as far as you can understand something, make it your goal to understand why it is the way it is, why a person is the way they are, not based on your own understanding, but on an accurate understanding of that reality that you've gotten from the person about themselves or from reality about how it functions. Never rely on your own understanding. Always obtain information about reality and always investigate it beyond your initial obtainment of it. Okay, that is our duty as it pertains to truth and accuracy of how our reality functions fully. As far as morality is concerned, apply righteousness in truth. People say, be a good person. Okay, that's a concept that you might hear be said quite often. That kind of misses the point. It misses the point that there is no one who's righteous, not even one. There's none who does good before God. Every thought and intent of man is evil from his youth. This comes straight from Scripture. But that doesn't mean that people don't have an understanding of good. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that people appreciate, even though they cannot naturally serve God in their natural self. And so you can meaningfully be righteous. You can meaningfully do good to other people in a way that genuinely resonates with them, even if they don't fully understand why that is, or worship the God who governs your own righteous action. Okay? So with that said, make an effort, like Paul says in Romans 12, I believe it is, to be at peace with all men, insofar as you are able to do so. Okay, that doesn't mean compromising on truth. It means presenting the right truth at the right time to the right people in a way that affirms a need that they actually have. Sometimes that's easier than other times. Sometimes a person actually needs to hear a hard truth. I've had hard truth conversations regularly, especially over the course of the last few months. People asking me questions on the relationship front. People asking me questions on the theological or perspective, life perspective fronts. And I simply oftentimes have had to tell them, hey, straight up, this is not as accurate as you think it is. It's missing some context here. And it would be good for you to get some more context here and then to make a more informed decision. Don't listen to me. Go get a fuller picture understanding. You have two puzzle pieces of the puzzle, and based on those two puzzle pieces, you're drawing a certain conclusion about what is right to do here, what is good to do here. What I'm saying is, it's not entirely wrong, but just go out and get like 4 or 5 more puzzle pieces of the 10, 15 piece puzzle, and you might not have all the puzzle pieces, but at a minimum, you'll be able to better see what the image actually is and what you can actually and should actually do based on that fuller picture understanding. Okay, that should be our pursuit when it comes to morality. Get the full picture, understand the full context, understand what actually would be good to do in this specific circumstance based on the principles I understand about what righteousness actually looks like, what it actually looks like to be a good person, not as an independently good person, but as someone whose heart, whose conscience has been changed by the God of the universe. Be more aware. Apply righteous truth. That requires wisdom. That requires discernment. Being able to tell the difference between right and almost right. But if you make that your pursuit, what you'll find is that you'll be able to be at peace with more men, and you'll be able to actually foster relationships with people in a much more God glorifying and human approval type of manner, not for the sake of approving or gaining human approval, but for the sake of gaining God's approval and being at peace with men in certain circumstances. To that point, continuing actually into relationships, how do we apply truth and pursue truth in our relationships? Fundamentally, that starts with governing your relationships on principle. Okay. As an example, my wife and I have been married for just under a year now, and there are not many things that we practically share in common when it comes to hobbies. We have the few things that we enjoy doing together, okay, whether that be watching a movie, whether that be walking in the park, whether that be hanging out with friends, getting lunch together, and just talking about life. We have the few things in common that we like to do. But as far as practical hobbies, she loves doing art. She likes doing other stuff. That's the one she mentions a lot of the time. She really wishes that we could go pottery painting together. Maybe we will. But the point is, she would rather do something like pottery painting. She's not a big sports person. I am a huge sports person. I don't necessarily like pottery painting. And so from a preference perspective, we are very, very different practically. But from a principle perspective, we're pretty much entirely aligned, which is why our relationship works, which is why our relationship has peace. And this is not necessarily to give marriage advice or dating advice, but it is to give the advice that successful relationships operate when they're governed on principle, not governed on preference. If you try to find unity in preference and have difference in principle, what you'll find out is that very important truths oftentimes do not get communicated. And very important pursuits of truth in certain very important life contexts do not get appropriately dealt with. And that is the type of thing that can corrupt any type of relationship, a friendship, a dating relationship, a marital relationship. Principle has to be the ground. Truth has to be the ground of a relationship. It cannot be preference. Two people who are fallible, who are hindered by their material flesh from fully apprehending God's truth, cannot ground their relationship on things they like to do together. They have to ground their relationship on a sense of purpose, on a sense of morality, on a foundation of truth that is 100% testable and verified. They both have to testify to the reality that this is true and I've seen it work in my life. Not because I created it, but because it exists in reality and it exists for the purpose of bringing peace in relationship. So fundamentally, as far as relationships are concerned, pursuing that type of unity in principle over unity in preference is really how you obtain that peacefulness in whatever your relationships are, however deep they might be. Lastly, as it pertains to work, tying together loose ends. Okay, now it's very common in our work culture today, especially in the capitalist society that we live within, where work and effort and merit are the grounds of success in this country, of the pursuit of the American dream. It's very easy for people to get worn out. It's very easy for people to struggle to get the motivation to get up and go to work in the morning and produce a product for the sake of keeping the mechanism going, so to speak. But that's actually really not the best way to think about it. How we should approach work in a truthful way, in a truth-oriented manner, really shouldn't be about what we're doing only. Again, it should be about why we're doing it. What's the purpose behind it? What's the truth principle that governs the truth of me needing to take this specific practical action? I'll give you an example. Over the course of my career so far, at least the first few years of it, oftentimes as someone who is new into the workforce, I was given a task to do without fully being told why we do it. Yeah, I was told, okay, perform, as an accountant at least, I was told, hey, perform this reconciliation, enter this transaction with this specific account coding, book it to this specific ledger account. But I wasn't told why we did that. Why was that the case? What truth principles, what accounting principles were being used and referred to that made this the correct way to do this? I wasn't being told that. I was only being told what to do. Over time, I got new management in my department, and they are very, very the opposite. They are very why oriented. This is what we need to do, and this is why we need to do it. Here are the truth principles that govern this action that is performed and aligns with the truth of what must be done in this circumstance. The tie back to duty in some sense. And so in our daily work, as hard as it might be to be motivated certain days, certain weeks, you'll never be perfectly motivated to go to work, by the way. So that's a bad thing to orient your perspective around. Regardless of how we feel, we can always tie together loose ends. We can always say, okay, this is what I need to do, but why do I need to do it this way? Why does it work this way? Okay, and we can seek out information either online by using the plethora of resources available to us online, not just Google, but also all the AI available, the classes that are available as well, if that's something that you're able to afford. It's not necessary, but we can seek out many resources online to be able to give us information. We can seek out, hopefully in an ideal circumstance, a person in our department or wherever we work who is able to provide some insight into the why behind a certain practice. And what we find when we do this is that we actually get a much deeper peace yet again, even in our work, from just understanding why things work the way they do. When you plug yourself into, again, the broader context, the bigger picture of whatever you're doing, you just feel more content within that circumstance. Even if you're solving a problem, like a problem that's really hard to resolve, even if you have to go back and correct something you've done that was incorrect at one point in time, regardless of what you're doing, tying together loose ends is what brings that comfort in a work type context. And it does so because you're getting the truth about the why, not just what needs to be done. So in a work context, as we align ourselves with truth, it's so important that we tie together those loose ends. Don't be willing to just ignore the why because you're too tired to do so, because you're not motivated enough to do so, because they don't pay you enough to do so. Take advantage of the opportunity. Tie together the loose ends. Experience the peace that comes from having a deeper, more refined foundation of truth in your work context. And what you'll find is that you'll actually obtain more peace regardless of the circumstance that you're a part of. So that wraps up today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this discussion of truth and how we can better align with truth, not just on the spiritual front, but also on the practical front, the relational front, the moral front, the dutiful front, and the personal identity front. I hope this was really beneficial for you. This was a fun first episode for me. Not having to be tied to reading verbatim for most of an episode and actually just being able to talk about these things because I think about them so often and I hear so many stories from people who I know well and people who I don't know well that I just want this to be an encouragement to someone who's struggling with understanding what truth is, why truth cannot be something that we create, and how we can pursue a deeper understanding of truth on all fronts, spiritual and practical, in every aspect of our life. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Vitality Principle. Until next week's episode, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Put some of these principles into practice, and I'll see you at that point in time. Till then, take care and always be vital.